Join me for a conversation with a prolific RPG writer, developer, designer, and streamer.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. Okay, guys, I have another awesome interview coming right up. But first, if you could help the show out in some way, I would greatly appreciate it. All you have to do is in your favorite podcast player or app or wherever you are listening to this podcast, just remember to like, rate, review, or to subscribe to the podcast. Those things are extremely helpful to the show, and some of them only take you a few seconds to do, so I would greatly appreciate that. Also, if you are in a position to support the show financially, I would love you to join my other patrons at patreon.com/dicegeeks. Also, I create the books of random tables. You can find them on DriveThruRPG, Amazon.com, or my own website, dicegeeks.com. Or you could just search the Book of Random Tables on Google, and a lot of them will come up. Those help game masters cut down their prep time and have more fun at the table. All right, guys, here's today's interview. My guest today is a writer, designer, developer, and streamer, Travis Legge. Travis, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. How were you first introduced to tabletop role-playing games?
Oh, my initial introduction was I was fortunate enough to have an older brother in the early 80s who got into Dungeons and Dragons. And because I was a dutiful younger brother, I wanted to do everything he was doing. So I was probably 4 or 5. The first time that I played Redbox D&D, and I mean, I'm sure I didn't know what I was doing, but my mother, showing a surprising amount of wherewithal for it being, the early days of the Satanic Panic, she basically decided that if we were going to play this game, she was going to be, in charge of it. So she would be our dungeon master and run games for us. So that was my first encounter with role playing. And I hesitate to say how long that went on for because, it's childhood memories. So they're all garbled together. But my next clear memory after that was discovering Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness at the comic book store. And that's a Palladium game. Picking that up, I was probably 11 or 12. I picked that up to play with some friends and have been running games ever since. So.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely want to ask a few follow-up questions because
sure.
It's interesting. It sounds like we have a similar story. I had an older brother but his friend was into D&D. And so we started playing. And of course, I had to do everything they were doing. So that sounds very familiar. And this was the early 80s as well. And then it's interesting that you say that your mom took over and started running games. To me, that just sounds awesome. Because the first game that I ran was the day after I played for the first time. I ran my mom through a dungeon because I was I was 9, and I had no idea what the rules. I think they had said something like, you need a 14 or higher to hit, and that's just what I did. I just said, here, you have a character, Mom, roll 14 or higher to hit this thing that tries to attack you. So I ran my mom through a dungeon. So that's interesting that you say your mom became your dungeon master. And then, of course, I encountered Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles as well when I was in junior high. And I don't know, kind of the height of the turtle craze.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I already had a bizarrely precocious perspective on the Ninja Turtles, I guess. And again, I attribute this to my older brother, and that may be just me misremembering it, but I had been exposed to the comics, like the old Eastman Laird comics, prior to the cartoon.
Oh, wow.
So, and that may have been because we were a very comic book heavy household. And for being in a small town, I grew up in a town called Mauston, Wisconsin, that has 3,000 people and 5,000 cows in it. And, but for being a small town, we had some relatively niche entertainment available for the kids. There was an arcade, which was surprising at the size of the town at the time. And there was a comic book store. So my brother and my cousins and I would go to the comic book store weekly, and pick up all sorts of things. And that led me to also having a great deal of comics literacy at an age I probably shouldn't have been reading most of the stuff I was reading. Like I distinctly remember excitedly heading to the comic store as new issues of Watchmen were dropping. And I was far too young to be reading Watchmen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now, I didn't. My first introduction to the Turtles was the cartoon, and then I learned that it was a comic book after that, because it seems like I went into a comic book shop and they were trying to push the comic book then, because it's like, hey, look, it's actually a comic book, and has been for a while. And but yeah, that's I don't know, that's just I always find people's origin stories kind of fascinating. So then you said that you just kept running games, and I'm sure you branched out and played a lot of other games. Did you play other Palladium games as well, I assume?
I did. The next Palladium game I really got into was Rifts.
Okay.
And which then by extension becomes everything. But yeah, I was into Rifts for I still love Rifts. I generally no offense, Mr. Ciambata, if you hear this, I generally prefer the Savage Worlds port these days, because I have a life and I don't have 9 months to generate a character.
Yeah.
But it's one of my favorite settings, hands down, to this day. So much fun. And I actually, not that long ago, had an opportunity, a couple years back, I guess, to get some writing in the Rifter, which was kind of a big, it was a point of personal pride, if not a professional feather in the cap,
Yeah, absolutely. And I tried playing other Palladium games as well, and no offense either. I struggled with it. It was one of the games that, because I tried playing, me and a few friends were really obviously into superheroes, so we were trying to play Heroes Unlimited, the second edition, quite a bit. And one of my friends at one point, he did bring the Rifts book. And he's like, oh my gosh, you've got to see this. And we look at it and I'm like, it's fantastic, but I can't anymore.
Right. Yeah. It's just too crunchy. And,
yeah.
But having said that, though, I mean, that taught me a lot, and I didn't realize it at the time. But that did teach me a lot of sort of the basics that I still use when I'm designing games. And this is going to sound way worse than I mean it to, but in many ways, of what to avoid in terms of does this need its own system? Do I need a crunch for this bit of the setting? And just in terms of of management of how things are interacting with one another, because the system is so, and if you you'll hear the Palladium crew kind of talk about, well, the system works really well, which is why we don't change it. And it works well internally, with itself, it works and it makes good sense. It's just super dense. Yeah. So it's a bit of a time sink, to create a character, to play that character, to level that character up kind of every time you have to interact with your character sheet, even in combat. And so that kind of taught me okay, so how do I convey all these cool setting things and streamline it a little bit? And I'm experimented with homebrew was Rifts.
Mm-hmm.
Like in terms of like, I'm going to try a different rule and see if this works instead of going to the book every time. I was very much a go to the book every time DM when I first started. And the thing that broke me of that actually was DC Heroes from Mayfair.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And
superhero stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, what you're saying there too, like I said, no offense to Palladium games, the setting material and like the powers in the Heroes Unlimited, which I'm more familiar with, like I'll still get out that Heroes Unlimited book every once in a while, because if I think of a superhero, the power's in that book. Like, I mean, like you just, it's awesome.
Yeah. You cannot fault Palladium for a lack of completeness.
Yes.
That is not a problem for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was like, I mean, if we were talking to like there was like a core 3 of us or so who like playing, Heroes Unlimited. And there's, there'd be like a 4th friend who would be like, oh, you're playing superheroes? Could I make this kind of hero? And it's like, yeah.
Absolutely.
Like there's just not a question. Yeah, it's in the book. It's, you can make it. So, and of course, riffs, even just flipping through some of the material for riffs. I mean, it is incredible.
Right. I want to play George Washington riding a cybernetic dinosaur that's got laser eyes. Done.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, you can just do like anything, and that is amazing. I haven't played the Savage World version yet, so but it does look really
surprisingly good. Like when I saw that was happening, and I do some Savage Worlds work myself. I have a setting, sort of near future dystopian setting called Citizens Divided. That I do that's uses the Savage Worlds engine. So I'm familiar with how it works and whatnot. And when I first heard that port was happening, I was like my response was literally like, nuh-uh. Like there's no way. There's no way they're going to pull this off. And lo and behold, they sure did. And I mean, it is, it's obviously denser than your average Savage Worlds thing. You're getting into, more literacy in the system is required for a starting player, because you're starting off with these epic packages. Basically, is how they broke down. So you can be a dragon, you can be a juicer, you can be a glitter boy. All these things are still there. They're just treated as like a character creation package. So you're starting off with far more capabilities than you would if you were just playing a vanilla Savage Worlds game. But beyond that, it's still the same engine, still runs the same way. They, I think, very, very brilliantly just ported the mega damage concept over into like heavy weapons rules that were already in Rifts.
Okay.
It runs smooth. I mean, it's really smooth. It's good.
Okay. Yeah.
I can't advocate for that system enough. So if you've ever looked at Rifts and been like, that looks like a lot of fun besides the system, I go pick up the Savage Worlds port, because it is incredible. It's really well done. Yeah,
I will have to. I've played Savage Worlds only a couple times, and I really enjoyed it. So maybe I'll pick that up after the interview, because Rifts was awesome. So
I highly recommend it. Yeah, and I mean, and they've got so many books out now, and if you have any sort of inkling towards design or homebrew, even. With the amount of material that they've released, if you pick up, like, I would say there's probably 4 books that like you would really need to get the full gamut of what they have, because they have like the setting book, the GM book. There's one that's like magic, and then there's the dimensional beings of North America, right? Yeah. If you have those 4 books, you can literally port anything from Palladium's, like anything that's not covered in those books. There's enough information there to easily intuit, like, okay, well, how would this look if I put it over into Savage Worlds? It's super, there's like nothing you can run into. And I know that's a bold statement, because there's literally everything in Rifts, but it really sort of gives you enough of a perspective that you can look at it and say, okay, I see how this works. I see how this goes to this. I see how these things connect. So yeah, I mean, you could probably I'm probably overselling it. You could probably do that with just the player's guide and the GM's guide, to be honest.
Okay.
So I mean, I really like, and I have zero, like absolutely nothing to do with that book whatsoever, but I encourage everyone to pick it up because I love Rift so much. It's such a great setting. Yeah,
absolutely. You mentioned a couple of things I do want to follow up on. Of course, you are a writer. You have worked on many, many projects. We'll get into more of that a little bit. You said you wrote something for the Rifter, which is like a magazine that puts out content for Rifts. What did you contribute to that?
Oh, I think it was in Rifter 78. Let me double check. But I created a village called Newstron. And the idea is that it is this, because the world of Rifts is this sort of post-apocalyptic, there was a major war and a whole bunch of people died. When they died, it released this psychic energy that kind of opened up these dimensional portals everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. So the idea being that in this village of Newstron, it's kind of put in such a place where it was kind of just outside the reach of some of the major political structures that have risen up since the apocalypse, right? So you've got like the Federation, and you've got the was it UCAS? Am I getting my rooms? The CAS.
Okay.
So you've got these various different governments, and their territories all sort of, and like the Pecos Empire and all that, and their territories all sort of overlap. But there's kind of a spot like right near Kansas where there's just this little hole where like not a whole lot of them go. And so I was like, wouldn't it be cool if there was a city that had strong enough fortifications and for whatever reason was able to sort of just wall themselves off and become kind of this little pocket of preserved culture. So the idea being that while they still also did get hit hard by the events of the apocalypse and whatnot, they were able to preserve much more art, much more literacy. They have, there's like the old, the Glitter Boy armor is sort of like a descendant of an armor that was made by the American government in Rifts. And they have like the original model Glitter Boys still servicing them because they never got, destroyed or subsumed. Mm-hmm. So it's just kind of this neat little place where you can go that's almost like a little, it's a gateway into either doing a game where like this is your home base for your campaign, so you have a safe home to go back to, or doing a campaign where it's like, okay, well, this is a little window into the past of the world. So if you want to delve into that really rich backstory that is there in Rifts, you can do so. That
sounds fun. Yeah, that sounds awesome. And then you also mentioned you have a setting for Savage Worlds called Citizens Divided.
Yes.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us a little about that?
So the premise of Citizens Divided was basically that in around 2030 or so, shortly after corporations basically achieve extraterritoriality, kind of, in a shadow running sort of vein. Mm-hmm. Taking Citizens United one step further, basically, there's a skirmish, a little war between sort of the 99%, just the average folk, and the corporations. And the corporations employ these exosuit pilots. Basically, they're mechs. They're like small mechs, for lack of a better term, to use as their security in their militaries. Well, a portion of the exopilots defect and join the proletariat, and there's an incident called the Fall of the Wall where they basically like blow up Wall Street. And shortly after that, they come to a treaty to end this fight, and it winds up with a redistribution of wealth. So there's probably, instead of it being like 99% of the people are or instead of it being 1% of the people controlling 99% of the wealth, it's like they control like 94% of the wealth. So it's a redistribution of wealth, but not nearly what it needs to be. And so there's this kind of ongoing tension between the corporations, the private citizens, and then the politics and the and just survival that goes on throughout that. And it has some elements of, like battle mech pilot type stuff. You can be a exopilot that's on either side of the divide. There's a lot of like just basic survival type stories that you can do. And of course, because cyberpunk is the genre that cyberpunk is, you can seek gainful employment doing very illegal things. So that's kind of the basic premise is like, let's take, I initially conceived it not long after Occupy Wall Street, I think. Mm-hmm. And so the idea that I was taking from it was just basically, let's do this 15 minutes into the future deal. I'm a big fan of Shadowrun. I love Shadowrun. And I was like, let's try that, but let's do it. Let's do this similar premise, but let's keep magic and mysticism and all that stuff out of it. And just really look and see, okay, like with the technology we have today and what's going on in the world today, what might it actually look like in 50 years? And that was my attempt to do that, but also make it into a playable, fun environment that has an environment still.
Yeah.
As our planet might not. So
yeah,
that's kind of the premise there.
Yeah. It sounds really interesting.
Thank you.
Of course, usually, if somebody says post-apocalyptic, I'm usually sold. So it's usually not a hard sell for me. When somebody says that, I guess that's why I like Rifts and Shadowrun and some of these other things. But that sounds really interesting. But like, and I definitely wanted to follow up on those. But like I've been saying, like you have, I want to kind of rewind a little bit because as I introduced you, you're a writer, you're a designer, developer, streamer. What kind of made you do the leap from playing role-playing games to writing for role-playing games? Was writing something you've always wanted to do?
I've always loved storytelling, which is probably how I sort of just gravitated to the forever DM role. Mm-hmm. Even as a kid, just playing with, the G.I. Joes and the He-Man toys, I was always about like, what's the story? Like, I don't care who can beat who up. What's the story we're telling? Mm-hmm. So I wound up, I was running a live action role playing game. I think if I'm not getting the order of events out of order, I was running a live action role playing game with a couple of very close friends of mine. And we had discussed the idea of putting together a game world. And this was what ultimately wound up becoming Contagion. And just as we were trying to like come up with, okay, like what's the system going to look like if we try to do this? Can we design a system? Can we really make this work? The open game license came out for 3rd edition. And so we were all like, oh, forget it. Let's just do it in D&D. We can make there's modern D20 modern. We can make this work. Mm-hmm. And so we made this modern horror / urban fantasy setting called Contagion. And the initial premise of Contagion, when we first released it, was, we're going to go with the idea that the Abrahamic faiths have it right. There is a God, there is a devil. And this is how that fight has played out in the shadows for the last, since time began. Mm-hmm. And now in the modern world. So we found different avenues to connect traditional fantasy creatures to that mythos that I thought was honestly some of the most fun, creative energy I've ever experienced, was coming up with like, so how did elves wind up being elves?
Yeah.
And a lot of it came down to curses from different demons and stuff like that. So we built this whole world out, and we, self-published it. And this was, I think RPG Now launched a couple of months before we launched Contagion.
Oh. Okay.
We were one of the very early sign-on publishers there. And we did that kind of as a hobby for 5-6 years. And then the other two guys that I had formed the business with, Darius McCaskey and Toy Caesar, they got lives and, families. And we're like, this is turning into a time sink I don't have time for. And so I bought them out. And shortly after I bought them out, now in the interim, I had started going to college for, initially I was going to go into journalism. And then I looked at the state of journalism at the time and went, no, I don't want to do that. But I found that there was a very good media production program at my school. So I switched to that focus and I started doing film. And so I actually wound up making independent films for about 10 years and hardly doing any gaming at all. And that wasn't because I didn't like it or didn't want to be doing it. It's just I literally didn't have time. Independent film it's like having a vampire just latched onto you constantly. You never get to do anything but that. Yeah. And after a decade of repeatedly having my heart ripped out and shown to me like it was, Temple of Doom, I quit that racket and got back into tabletop games. I've been doing that ever since.
Yeah. And it's just interesting as well, because when I was in college, I studied screenwriting and filmmaking, and I did quite a lot of independent filmmaking for about a decade. And when I was completely broken mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally,
it's so bad.
I gave it up. So that's quite interesting that we have some parallels there.
I'd like to use your platform to make a public service announcement real quick. If you're thinking about going into film, don't. Holy cow, it's just awful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if I would be blanket statement, but if you don't have to work, right? Like if your parents are like independently wealthy and you don't have to work, then do film.
Right. If you're related to a Spielberg, absolutely hop into this.
If your mom, if your mom or dad is like in the film industry, then do that. Then go into the film industry. But it's rough. And if you, especially if you're trying to do independent stuff anywhere but LA or something like that, you're going to meet a lot of, I'll put it in quotation marks, interesting people. And
you will do that for sure.
Yeah. So, and you'll get some experiences, and then you just try to just not be bitter. That's what you do. You just,
right.
Yep.
Yeah. That's how that goes.
Yeah. So it's a tough deal. Maybe now with, if you're making them on your phone, and a $60 drone from Walmart, and you're just having fun, hey, you can do some of that, but it's rough. It's a rough deal.
Oh yeah, for sure. I would like, not to go too far into a tangent or an aside, but what I would honestly like, if you like, oh, I would love to make movies one day, start you a YouTube channel and make like 2-3 minute digital shorts.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And just have fun with it. And first of all, that could wind up being monetized, but also if you're doing stuff that's going to catch people's eyes, that might get you a foot in the door in the big boy business. But independent film, it's a fool's errand.
Yeah. Well, I would second most of that. Yeah. I would say, make short films of some type and put them on YouTube, and just make one like a week if you can, while you're young and you don't have a ton of responsibilities. And then maybe something will come of that, or, but yes, because I mean, one of the things, I know we're going on a tangent, but I do filmmaking stuff a lot on the podcast, because this is kind of, because I still have a love-hate relationship with it. Because every once in a while, I'll get this idea and I'll be
it's the worst.
This would make a great screenplay, and I think I could pull off like 70% of it myself if we only got, and then I'm like, what am I talking about? I'm going to go crazy. I'm just gonna but, yeah,
I know that pain.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And so, I mean, nowadays with the stuff where like I was trying to do it when I don't know. I still had to, well, when I first started, I was chopping, using a guillotine with film and still chopping some stuff, and I mean, this was like, in the 90s. So we were still doing that because, you couldn't work on video back then. Now, now the Marvel movies are shot on video, but like, yeah, I think I forgot one of my points anyway, but I'm still going down the tangent of filmmaking a little too much just because, and, just for the listeners, I'm not bitter, really. I'm not. I'm not bitter. That's what I just tell myself in the mirror every morning,
Right, exactly.
I'm not bitter. But anyway, obviously, I think there's a connection there to role-playing games, right? Because when we're sitting there playing, it's like us and a few friends are creating a movie, we're creating a TV show.
Absolutely.
And I think that was almost just natural for me from being a kid playing, role-playing games to then, when I come to, when foolishly start making my own decisions as a young adult, I say I could do filmmaking because I love telling these stories. And this is just like, this is the medium of our age, right? This visual medium. And, I just wanted to tell stories. And I think that's where I got into trouble too, is that I never really viewed it as like a job. I went to school with some people who ended up doing really well because they were, they became a cameraman for like NBC, or they, they did something like that, or they became a producer on, on a, like a, a live sports show or something, on some other thing. And I was viewing it like, I wanted to tell stories. Like, I just wanted to tell a story, and I'm just trying to learn some of these skills so I can tell a story. And then, you come out of college and you realize, I don't know where the food is. And
there are very few people who have caught that lightning in the bottle, and most of them in the early 90s. Of like, we're gonna tell stories that are interesting and gripping, and we're gonna do that as a living. Yeah. And it just there was a magical moment. Unfortunately, I was at a very impressionable age during that magical moment.
Oh, sure.
Sure. Well, so I believed I could be the next Kevin Smith.
Robert Rodriguez, John Singleton, right? I mean, they were both 23. Yeah, Kevin Smith was in his 20s. I mean, you were just like, it just seemed like you just make a movie and then you're set, and or something like that,
and just not how it works. The problem is we didn't get our work in front of the right predators.
Well, I mean, perhaps if we're being cynical, perhaps yes. I think just practice. I think that was one thing that I'd try to put together things and stuff, and like I'd go a year or so or two without doing something, and it's just like I needed the practice, right? Like I didn't realize some things. I didn't realize Robert Rodriguez, had a video camera in his hand and a film camera in his hand when he was like 9 years old. Spielberg was making movies when he was 10 and 11, and I would just, I had to work, right? I had to, I had to put some food on the table. I had to do some things, and it was just like, I couldn't get the practice in. So it's just like, if you have that idea and you're in your teens, just start practicing as much as you can, or you're in college, you have to practice as much as you can. And then you have to meet people. You have to, you have to move to LA, or you have to do something like that. Or, or if you can use, or if you know how to use YouTube, you can post on YouTube and get it, get the right people to look at your YouTube. But it's a tough deal. And so this is a pretty long tangent.
It is very hard. Well, to bring it back, I guess, to the format or topic at hand is one of the greatest things about tabletop games, and one of the reasons why it was exactly where I ran back to when it was time to leave the film business, was because this is a medium of storytelling. Like you said, it is you and your friends making a movie or a TV show. Yeah. And most of the time, unless you are live streaming it in front of an audience or something like that, most people who play aren't. Most of the time, your only critics are going to be those the audience members who are also engaged in the storytelling, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's also nice because you don't need $100 million to make the 5 friends around the table happy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
and you can do things that I could not do if you handed me a pile of $100 million, right?
Yeah.
Like I can't tell the same story that you can tell at a role-playing game table on film.
Yeah.
Because you can literally do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the beauty of the art form. And that's what brought me back to it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, I had a similar kind of reaction too. It was like I had, pretty much quit filmmaking and was doing kind of the 9 to 5, or in my case, like 8 to 5:30 or whatever it was, or 8:30 to 5 kind of day job. And I needed the creative outlet. And the first thing I kind of went back to was tabletop role-playing games. And that's why I started Dice Geeks and started self-publishing, some of my own books, is because I just wanted to keep telling stories. And I kind of want to take an informal survey now of the tabletop industry and see how many of us are just frustrated filmmakers. You would be surprised. You would be surprised. I have interviewed, obviously now, well over 100 people for this podcast, and I have talked to a number of people. It's still probably a handful or so, but they have film degrees. They studied screenwriting. They worked in television for a little while or something like that. I mean, seriously, like of the 115 to 20 people that I have interviewed, I would say there's a good 10% that have done some type of filmmaking in their background. And and that's just interesting to me too, because even when I have interviewed some filmmakers, because I'll interview filmmakers on the podcast, when I interview filmmakers, if they are of a certain generation, if the older ones haven't played, but if they are a bit younger, they played Dungeons and Dragons or RuneQuest or a Palladium game or something when they were growing up, and that just like fed into their desire to tell stories. Like when I interviewed Robert Hewitt Wolf, who was a producer on Deep Space Nine, who created the show, the old show Andromeda, who was like executive producer on Elementary up until this recently. He plays RuneQuest or whatever. I think it was RuneQuest. He's like played, like that's what he did growing up in the 80s, right? Like he just played all that, all role-playing games. And he still runs a game for his, for a group of people who are out there, all who work in the industry and stuff, because it's just a way to tell stories. They're fascinated by it, right? They love stories. And so I just think it's, you hear stories too, like John August, one of the top, screenwriters in the world. He plays Dungeons and Dragons. He played all growing up during the 80s. So, I mean, it's just, I think there's something about that personality that is just drawn to it. And also if, I would say, about 10 or more % of the people I've interviewed have a filmmaking background, and myself included. There is also another thread, and that is novelists, people who want to write novels or short stories. Every person does that, right? So like we're just fascinated with stories, I think. Oh yeah, no, it's really that and plastic are the only things that humanity have to contribute to the planet. So I think that's probably part of why it is. And and I used to, when I would romanticize what I do, when I felt like I needed to feel extra special, I would think about how what we're doing at the table. What was it I used to say? What we're doing at the table is no different than what we used to do around the campfire in the cave. It's that old of a form of storytelling. We're just throwing dice on top of it. Mm-hmm. And I do, to a degree, believe that. I mean, it's a little bit of a poetic license, but I mean, to a degree, it's also true, though. Yeah. The art of storytelling is something that humans have done as long as we've been able to communicate with one another. And so it's great fun, and it's great escape, but it's also great
it's a great weapon for dealing with the things you perceive to be wrong with the world. That's one of the things that particularly since I've started doing so much work with Onyx Path Publishing, one thing that I've really just been very pleased with is the ability to use this medium to communicate visions of what the world should be like and visions of what is wrong with the world in a way that is digestible and that someone else can build a story off of, and that they might take a lesson from it that's not explicitly stated in the book.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And sort of trying to trigger that type of thinking in people without artifice, which is a tough needle to thread. And and sometimes it's just, like I was working on Technocracy Reloaded. I had the extreme privilege of getting to be one of the co-developers on that book for Mage, the Ascension 20th Anniversary Edition, the Technocracy Reloaded book. And it was like being asked to play with the Beatles. You know what I mean? Like Mage was the game I really like. I always loved gaming, but Mage was the game I fell in love with. Mm-hmm. And so I got to work with Satiros, with Phil Briccato, the person who developed it during second edition and now during most of 20th Anniversary Edition. And so that was just kind of dream come true, rock star level type stuff. But as we were working on it, one of the things that we were very concerned with was, okay, how do we portray the technocracy, this historically totalitarian, authoritarian, polluting technology before people sort of entity in a way that's palatable, let alone can be the heroes of the story. And so the tactic we wound up taking with it was this idea that the Union itself kind of looked at the world around it and went like, oh, this isn't what we had in mind. Like, we've given the sleepers all these tools and this is the world they built with it. Like, this is what you did. So now the enemy, sort of for the 21st century face of the technocracy, the enemy is not tradition mages or vampires, it's human ignorance. And how do you foster knowledge and understanding in people without pushing them too far and making them into, rival awakened? So to me, that's a more interesting story. There's a lot of fun to be had with the whole, dystopian, they're going to put you in room 101 because, happiness is mandatory type stuff. That stuff's fun, but I think that there's also much cooler stories and much more meaningful stories to be told. And like, where does the line exist between, being a shepherd or a steward of the world around you and being a totalitarian, thug? Where does the line exist between being a rational person and, the actions driven by irrational fears, right? Mm-hmm. And we're seeing that play out in so many ways in the real world right now. You know what I mean? People who, despite the mountain of scientific evidence about the way that the pandemic that we are all experiencing at the same time works, people have wildly different opinions about how it's supposed to be addressed. That fascinates, it terrifies me, but it also fascinates the hell out of me. Where the difference in that perspective lies.
Yeah. And you do bring up something interesting there. Of course, you have written a number of settings for tabletop role-playing games. And, you were kind of giving us some insight right there into what you think should go into an interesting setting. If somebody out there is trying to create a setting even for just a homebrew game with their friends, what are some other kind of elements that you think go into a good RPG setting?
I mean, you can take almost any element, any sort of like widget, and make it interesting. Mm-hmm. I think the ways to facilitate that are less about the element and more about trying to find a defined version in your mind of what you want the player experience at the table to be. What sort of challenges do you want the players to go through? What sort of stories are you trying to get them to tell? And what sort of stories are you trying to steer them away from? And designing from a player first, building your world from a player first and an experience first basis, I think is the way to go. I think if you're going to build a setting, and you want it set in a modern contemporary world, for example, despite what some of the people in the industry or people who are in the hobby might say, mm-hmm. It's impossible to avoid being political in that situation. So don't try. Instead, just decide what you want that setting's politics to communicate and design accordingly. If you have something to say about, colonialism, keep in mind at every decision you're making, what does this element that I'm introducing into the game say about that? What does that element say about that? And designing in such a way, the best good villains are always any storyteller will tell you having a good villain is like primo, like 90% of your work's done if you have a good villain. Building your villains in such a way where while they may be utterly deplorable, there is something that not even necessarily you like about them, but that is magnetic about them. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And maybe it even is just the level of depravity or deplorableness this villain engages in, you know what I mean? Like maybe that's what it is.
Yeah.
But then you start running things through the filter of, okay, so how do I convey that experience? How do I make the people at the table or the reader who's planning on running this game, how do I make them go, holy crap, that villain is awesome, as opposed to, oh, this guy again? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And those, they're so like, it's almost so ephemeral. It's difficult to give advice on. Mm-hmm. But pick those elements, pick those things you want to make sure you convey and stick to your guns with them. One of the things, I do a lot of the development on the Scarred Lands Dungeons and Dragons setting for Onyx Path for 5th edition. And, one of the things that has been like my guiding star since I stepped into that role was this mission statement of it is Greek mythology as told by Heavy Metal Magazine. You know what I mean? And,
yeah.
let every aesthetic decision I make be guided by that. And if I ever feel like I'm lost or I don't know what to do next, I either listen to a 5-minute YouTube video about some Greek myth, or I flip through an issue of Heavy Metal. You know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, like it's not, so having those touchstones, I think, are super important. And it doesn't have to be a big, that is a 2-item list. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But first of all, it always gives me a home base to return to. And secondly, if you communicate that to someone, anyone who knows what those two things are immediately knows what that setting is about.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't have to tell you the complicated backstory of the Divine War and all that stuff. Like I tell you those two things, and you're like, oh, I know what that is. Now you might be sold. You might be like, I'm never playing that, but you know what it is, you know?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, boiling it down to those sort of very, very core elements. And obviously all the things you learn in screenwriting, you know, that's what I just gave is basically an X meets Y pitch, you know? You know, so, and we live in the internet age, you know, if you want to learn some of these tips and tricks, take an online screenwriting class, you know? I mean, it's not hard. And it's not price prohibitive these days, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think the pitch like that, like the kind of the this plus that, anytime I've used those to my players, that's usually when I get like, you know, a huge buy-in, right? Like automatically, because if I say something like, it's, you know, it's a just random thing. It's Mad Max, but with samurai.
Right.
People, you know, my group is just like, let's play that right now. And I'm like, no, it's just an idea. Like, I just thought of it. Like, and they're like, let's play it. Are we, you know, were we free? Like, let's play it right now, you know? And, you know, or whatever, or it's, you know, it's like, it's Firefly with superheroes. And it's just like cancel all plans. Let's play it right now, right? Like they just want to do that, right? Like, so like, you know, I think those are great pitches, and like what you just said for the, you know, Scarred Lands is just, yeah, it's perfect. Greek mythology plus heavy metal magazine. I'm already there, right? Like that's just, you know,
right. You can close your eyes and picture what that looks like. You know what I mean? Like you can...
absolutely, and yeah, and you'll also, you can just tell by telling somebody the look on their face, right? Like if you say that and they're not into it, you say, okay, well, you're not too into it. Or you see their face and their eyes are just like Mad Max with samurais. You know, I never knew I wanted this, but I want it now. You know, I never knew I wanted Greek mythology with heavy metal magazine, but now I want it. Right? Like that's. So I think those are. I think that pitch is a great. You know, just a great way to pitch a setting to somebody. I think that is just because you take, like you said, like your word you used was a touchstone that somebody has a familiarity with, but then, you know, it's mixed into something and it becomes new. And I think that's when, you know, people get it really fast.
Well, and I think sometimes a writer, even like really good writers and really good DMs, can sometimes lose sight of that. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think the best writing advice comes to you from that is don't forget your own, like, don't buy your own marketing, but don't forget your own marketing. You know what I mean? Like, don't believe your press, but remember what they wrote. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you can always, that way, if you find yourself wandering too far, you can always say, okay, how does this fit into this box? Mm-hmm. And if it doesn't fit, whittle it down till it does, or chuck it, you know?
Yeah.
I was just having a conversation with my 21-year-old child, because I'm an old man. My youngest is now able to drink. It's a sad world, but
wow.
I started early, to be fair, but we were talking about, I'm working on art notes for a book right now, and I was talking about just the various different things that need to be juggled. You know, when you're a developer, you know, and you have to write out the art notes to give to the art director. You know, I have to define the look of this book, and there are 100 do's and don'ts that you'll get, you know, from like the art director of the company or whatever, that you have to filter every idea through. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you just get terrible ideas. You know, ideas that don't work. And sometimes you follow that path for a little while, you know?
Yeah.
You got to be not afraid to, I think David Lynch probably said it. I think, don't be afraid to throw a bad idea in the garbage.
Yeah.
Just if it's not working, eject it and find something that does work. I think if you keep those touchstones in mind, though, you'd be surprised at what you can reshape to fit your touchstones.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned samurai with a ostensibly science fiction mashup. I mean, take that a step further. If we instead of Mad Max, we mash up samurai with Firefly, what do you have? You have Star Wars.
pretty close.
Well, I mean, literally, like,
it
was
Jedis or samurais,
right?
Because that came from the Kira Kurosawa influence from George Lucas. Yeah, pretty much. Well, I mean, you could even do it with those, right? Like if you say, Star Wars. I mean, Star Wars is Akira Kurosawa meets Sergio Leone. I mean, meets John Ford. Maybe actually that would be better. It would be Samurai meets John Ford Western or something like that.
Yeah, and I can almost promise you, George Lucas said that to someone. That very sentence.
Yeah, he may have.
They probably said, "No, I'm not giving you any money. What are you talking about?"
Yeah, absolutely.
Go make another American Graffiti.
Yes, because we know the formula. Make that one. Yeah, absolutely. And seeing that in 1977 that 20th Century Fox had 2 science fiction movies on their slate, and one they just decided to dump, and one they poured a whole bunch of resources into. And the one they decided to dump, of course, just push it out to the theaters and let the creator market it on his own with his I'm forgetting the gentleman's name who was the genius marketer behind Star Wars. He passed away, but I can't remember his name. But that was Star Wars. That was the one they dumped, and their big one that was going to be their tentpole is Damnation Alley, and nobody talks about Damnation Alley except that it has a cool vehicle in it called the Landmaster.
I was half expecting it to be like Zardoz or something like that.
Zardoz. Oh gosh, Zardoz is his own thing. You can't even. That's when. I don't know how to describe Zardoz.
Just Google images Zardoz.
For the listeners, yes, Sean Connery. You're going to see Sean Connery in a way you've never seen Sean Connery, and if you don't know Zardoz, Zardoz is fascinating. Actually, it's one of those movies where you're like, how did this get made? Like, did this get made? Like, this is a real thing? Like, this is...
Somebody gave Sean Connery a very nice bottle of whiskey, and he said, all right, I'll do it. And then they said, we got Sean Connery. And so they just threw money at him. I mean, that's... And
John Borman, who is actually a really good filmmaker, but yes, is something else. The 70s were weird, man. Like,
very, very. And I mean,
weird.
Some of the cinema that comes from that period of time, one of the greatest pleasures I've had in recent memory is I got to do some writing for They Came From Beneath the Sea, which is the Onyx Path game. It was conceived by Matthew Dawkins, and it's Larry Blamire of Lost Skeleton of Cadaver fame.
Oh, yeah.
Does a bunch of the art for it and did some writing on it. And the premise is it's a role-playing game that is a 50s B movie. And you're playing these archetypes that are based in 50s B movies. And I got to write the jumpstart for it, which I think by the time this airs should be either out or close to being out.
Okay.
And so, my X meets Y pitch for this was, let's do Beach Blanket Bingo meets the horror of Party Beach. With a little bit of reefer madness thrown in. And they were like, can you refer to joints as jazz cigarettes? I was like, absolutely. And you sold.
But, I had seen a little bit about that game. I guess something dropped a while back. I can't remember. And I had seen a little bit. I didn't know the guy from Lost Skeleton of Cadaver was involved.
Yeah, absolutely. The system. Okay, so like we've talked about the collection of like people who are filmmakers who are also in tabletop games.
Yeah.
This is a game custom built for you, okay? Because the mechanics have 2 things that you're going to absolutely love. One is called quips, which is a series of one-liners that you can either choose or draw randomly at the beginning of the game. If you can use it and it remotely works in the context of the scene or is amusing enough out of context that it just works anyway, you get enhancement on your next die roll.
Well, I'm already sold. I'm going to have to look this game back out or something because I'm already sold. That's amazing. And what was the other one?
Cinematics, which are probably my favorite thing about it. So the meta of the game, you are playing characters in a B movie, but you're also kind of playing the actors in the B movie.
Yeah.
And so at certain times you can play cinematics to have the reality that you are in a film sort of affect the reality of the game. So for example, one is a cheap rubber costume. So like the monster becomes less effective because the costume is bad.
Yeah.
Like bad set construction where like you can run through a wall because it's just a paper mache wall. Kill the extra where like your character's about to take a wound, you play kill the extra and some unseen, unnamed character falls in front of you and then you like swear vengeance for the like
by Grapthar's hammer or whatever.
Exactly. And my personal favorite is missing reel, which so like your whole team is screwed, you're all about to die, you play the missing reel, the real missing screen is described by the director, and then you're all safely away in a different location. The only rule is you can never describe what happened during the missing reel. You can allude to it. You can make references to it. You can say things like, I've never seen someone do that with a pineapple, but you can't explain what actually happened.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm already sold. I'm like sold twice. I'm gonna buy copies and give them out to my game group to make sure they want to play.
You should. And it's expanding too. They're doing they came from Camp Murder Lake. They came from Beyond the Grave, which is like Hammer horror.
Yeah.
And the one that we just announced, I think, is they came from the Cyclops' Cave, which is entirely based on like Hennehausen stop motion, the Clash of the Titans type stuff. Yeah. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, yeah, I'm totally sold already. I have to say. So the first one is they came from Beneath the Sea.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'll definitely put links in the show notes for that, and I'm probably going to buy it. And because, well, I mean, they came from the Cyclops Cave. I mean, the first episode of this podcast, I talked to filmmaker John Walsh, pardon me, who is on the foundation of the board of the Ray and Diana Harryhausen Foundation, and he's in charge of like the archives of. He has like the models and all of the armatures and all of the things, and he's also a filmmaker and a writer in his own regard. But he is on the board of trustees. And
if he's ever a player and wants to play, I can see if I can get, once the text is ready. That one is just announced. They're still in the middle of writing it. But once the text is ready, we should all get together and do a live play, like a podcast or a stream. Invite him.
That would be amazing. That would be amazing. I mean, this is like way ahead of things, but I'm actually scheduled to do another interview with him because he wrote a new book on Escape from New York, the classic film from 1981 and John Carpenter. So I am scheduled for that. Now it's in the future, but when this comes out, so actually this will be a good callback for anybody who's listening. In like a month or so from this episode, there will be a month of me talking to John Walsh about Escape from New York, his new book about that, because we're talking a lot about movies and I'm going on. Well, apparently, Travis, that I could just talk to you for like 3 days straight because we have a lot of similarities here. And,
I was just going to say I could talk for a month about Escape from New York. So.
Oh my gosh, so could I. And so I'm looking forward to speaking to John again about Escape from New York because I don't know, there was something about those post-apocalyptic movies. We're all coming back to post-apocalyptic stuff today, but something about coming up because I was born in the 70s, of course, and then growing up in the 80s. Well, the 70s were so terrible. We thought the world was going to end. So we were still getting kind of these post-apocalyptic movies there in the 70s and in the early 80s, of course, with Road Warrior, Mad Max, and Escape from New York. That were just, like watching them as a childhood. I mean, the only thing optimistic we had was Star Trek, and they still went through a third world war in Star Trek. So,
right.
I mean,
Exactly. Humanity got almost wiped out. Like it was luck that saved humanity, basically. Well, and it's funny though, too, because I think people of our age, I think what they call an exennial. I'm like on the cusp of millennial Generation X. And I think that generation is the last generation that really grew up cogent of the fear that we might get nuked at any given moment. You know what I mean? Like
no,
as children, we were,
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'm getting the sense that I'm just a couple of years older than you, but not much. But
I was born in 79. So.
Oh, okay. I'm 73, so I'm a little bit.
So you're the same age as my older brother.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah. So
that explains why he was into D&D and stuff. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I thought it was going to be Mad Max. Like there was a good probably 2-3 years of my childhood where I just thought we were just going to be blown to pieces. And
oh, sure.
I mean, and that's just what I thought. I mean, and that is a weird thing. And then, of course, in the early 90s, when I came to, young adulthood, I mean, the crime and stuff was so bad. I mean, I just thought and we were still getting movies and stuff like that from filmmakers who were influenced. Like you were just like, we were still kind of running on those kind of apocalyptic fumes. Like the 70s were just a very dark time, and we were just running kind of on some of those because we just thought we were just going to die, and we needed to know how to like fish and siphon gas out of an old tank or something, because that's what it's gonna be like.
Night of the Comet type stuff, man. Well, children. Yeah, it was just like
oh man, that's another good movie, man. Oh, that's a really good movie.
No, I mean, for real, that was the stuff we were exposed to. That or like, and again, my parents were far too permissive with the HBO in the house. But I was probably 5 when I saw Chopping Mall the first time.
Goodness.
Yeah, I saw Evil Dead when I was way too young to see Evil Dead.
Yeah.
And a lot of the films of that era, I was a Trauma fan. I think before I was in double digits.
Yeah.
And a lot of those movies did shape us as a generation. And then we had, Y2K, the promised apocalypse that never came. Yeah. And then we had 2012, the promised apocalypse that never came. Yeah. And so I think in a certain sense too, our generation has lived our whole lives expecting the end of the world to drop next week, or at least being told it was going to, and it never coming. Yeah. And I think that's had some weird psychological effects on us too. Certainly. I mean, we also got September 11th, right? I mean, right. It's true. Yeah,
we also got some of these other things that, and I think those movies did shape. I mean, you can even go back. I mean, we're totally on another tangent, but say like A Boy and His Dog from 1975, or actually, for I mean, this was going to air after, but here. As we're recording this, we're recording in September. Next week at Gen Con Online, I'm giving a presentation on post-apocalyptic movies. So about Doomsday in cinema, just because I wanted to. And as we're recording, when this airs, it'll be past. But I mean, that's what I'm doing like next week.
You should record it so you can put it up somewhere.
I think I am going to record it and put it up. So I think I am going to do that because I'm doing it all online.
Well, if you do that, you should put the show notes in this so that I don't miss it.
Yeah, absolutely. I should.
That sounds like super fun.
Yeah.
Nothing sounds as fun to me as an apocalypse. What was that line? Was it Giles said in Buffy the Vampire Slayer? I suddenly find myself needing to know the plural for apocalypse.
No kidding. No kidding. We got a ton of them. But anyway, man, I could I could just keep talking about movies and role-playing games all day. I should definitely ask you, what are you working on now? Where can people find you, find your writing? And I'll definitely drop some links, but why don't you, tell me some, what are you working on right now? Where can people find you and your writing and stuff, man?
All right, cool. So right now, the biggest thing, I guess, that I'd want to steer people towards, you can find me anywhere on the internet, pretty much at Travis Legge, Legge is how the last name is spelled. Mm-hmm. It's my Twitter, my Facebook, my YouTube, my Instagram, my Snapchat, though I don't know why anyone would want that. Everywhere I am online, I'm basically that, except for on Twitch. I broadcast under Plastic Age Plays, or at the Onyx Path channel, where I'm also the program director and scheduling coordinator. So I do run a couple of actual play live streams. I run on the first, third, and fifth Wednesday of every month. I'm running a Scarredlands actual play called Sins of Shelzar, and we are playing through Dead Man's Rust, which is the next campaign book for Scarredlands. It's currently on BackerKit. We had a successful Kickstarter. It's due for release, I think, February 22. And we're playing through it now in actual play. But if you go to the BackerKit for Dead Man's Rust, you can actually if you back it, you can get the full manuscript now. So you can start playing right now too. It's just not edited and doesn't have layout. Yeah, and that's a big, huge campaign that I could talk for 10 days about how awesome it is. But if you Google the cover of Dead Man's Rust, again, you'll see it is Greek mythology by way of Heavy Metal Magazine. So if that sounds remotely interesting to you, check out the actual play. Check out Dead Man's Rust on BackerKit. Obviously, I'm very passionate about Mage. So if you've not checked out Mage the Ascension 20th Anniversary Edition or Technocracy Reloaded, I recommend both of those. If you just put my name in at Drive-Thru-RPG, you'll see a rather extensive list of things I've worked on.
Yes, extensive. Yes.
Yeah. And that's pretty much where I am and how to find me. I love hearing from people. So if you check out my work and you like it, please tell me. If you check out my work and you don't like it, please tell me nicely. We can talk about maybe what I can do better in the future. And if you look at me on IMDb, you can see I made some mistakes. And I mean, I had a film career.
Oh gosh, I don't even tell people to look up mine. I don't even want them to see it.
Yeah, no, there's a couple movies I'm pretty proud of that I got a chance to work on, but I got to do color correction for House of Manson, which is probably one of the out of movies I didn't direct. That's probably my favorite thing.
Oh wow. Oh wow,
that's pretty cool. But,
you probably got a lot farther than I did. I did a lot of I tried doing a lot of guerrilla stuff, and
that's what I did. I did a romantic comedy called Dry Spell, which was super fun. We shot it in New York City for 3 weeks. There were 9 of us living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, off of Flatbush. Mm-hmm. And the subway was our production vehicle. So we're running around with 4 bags on our shoulders, and we shot dialogue on a New York subway during rush hour, and it worked. Wow. Because our sound guy, rest his soul, was a genius. Wow. He did not die in filming, unrelated, but
that's good. He just never made it off that subway.
Right.
Oh gosh. Okay. Sorry, I didn't.
Trust me, he would have laughed. And I have a very, very dark sense of humor. So,
okay.
I was when he passed, I literally told his wife, I was like, if it wasn't for the fact that I know it would upset you, I would go in the house and take a selfie with him. You understand that, right? And she, and of course she cracked up because she knew. But he died at home on hospice care, so he was surrounded by his loved ones.
Okay. Well, that's good. Well,
Best ending one can ask for, I would say.
Yeah. All right. Well, I will be sure to, like I said, I could just keep talking. So, but,
For sure.
But like, you mentioned a lot of things there, and yes, you have an extensive list of credits. So I will put some links for your products on DriveThruRPG and some other places in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. So anybody who's listening right now to the podcast, once it is over, you can head over to dicegeeks.com, find the show notes for this episode, and you will see a lot of links there to some of Travis's awesome role-playing game material. So Travis, I could keep talking to you. I'm probably going to just have to have you on in maybe I'll reach out to you later on in 2022 or something like that. Absolutely. Because I could keep talking to you. So man, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me. This has been awesome.
All right, there you have it, guys. Oh my goodness. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Travis today. I am terribly sorry we got on so many filmmaking tangents. It was a little crazy, but it just seems that Travis and I have a lot in common when it comes to the fact that we studied and were involved in filmmaking kind of back in the day before we doubled down on RPGs as a career. So I hope you don't mind, but Travis shared a lot of fantastic information about tabletop role-playing games. So I know that you guys got a lot out of that interview. As I mentioned in the show, please head over to dicegeeks.com right now and find the show notes for this episode. You will see that Travis has worked on an incredible list of awesome titles, and you need to check some of those out. These are amazing, amazing games. And also, you will find links to his streaming there as well. All right. If you want some free stuff, head over to dicegeeks.com/free. Get 10 free dungeon maps. You'll never miss an episode of this show. And each and every Friday, you will get an email update from me letting you know what is going on in the world of Dice Geeks. All right, well, here's where I wrap up things, guys. I really appreciate you listening to me. Again, if you could support the show by liking, rating, reviewing, or subscribing, that would be awesome. Like, really awesome. Okay? But anyway, I thank you so much for listening to my humble podcast. And until next Wednesday, keep gaming!